You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. If you'd like to find out more about the Bearded Theologians, you can go online at beardedtheologians.com, where you'll find all of our past podcasts and other blog posts that we have up, along with some other items that you can purchase to help support the Beardcast. So we hope you enjoy listening to this week's show. You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold.
This week on the podcast, we were looking through the Hebrews reading this week, and there were two particular verses that kind of stuck out with us, and that would be Hebrews 10 verses 24 and 25. And so, Zach, as we read through this, what are some things that kind of come to mind for you?
Well, I want to start by reading them because I think that's important for the context of our listeners. So Hebrews 10 verses 24 and 25. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meetings together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. I really, really, really like these couple of verses for a lot of reasons. One is it starts with let's love one another. Let's love one another in all that we do in our acts, and and it's just everything we do, right? And what we say and what we do and how we just approach people. I mean, that's the first thing that's just really, really deep. Really deep to unpack. Is how are we treating one another? Are we approaching people with love? Are we approaching ourselves with love? And what does that do? What does that motivate us? How does that motivate us to act? Are we in return doing good work? Are we loving God and we loving people? Are we doing good and doing no harm? Those types of things that we often talk about on this podcast. And it's the next part that I really like. Let us not neglect our meetings together. I think some of that goes into worship, but I also think that comes together in our conversations with each other. This idea that when we're with someone else, when we are present, talking to someone, whether it be face-to-face, whether it be digitally, whether it be over a cup of coffee, whether it be in a podcast Zoom call, right? That we're present with that person, that we're doing our best not to let distractions come in, right? I think a lot of people like to take that verse out and pick it and say, well, you have to be in worship. You have to be in these places. That's part of it. Yeah, we need to worship together and worship in community. But I'm a firm believer that we are where we need to be in those moments, whether that's in church on a Sunday in worship, or if that's out with your grandkids, or if that's out in the mountains, or if that's out doing whatever you're doing. I feel like we're where we need to be in those moments. And if we're fully present in those, then we aren't neglecting those times together. And then in return, it backtracks into the other part, is love motivating our actions. So I think those two tie in really well together. And I think there's a lot to unpack there in just a really short amount of time.
So as we were reading this and talking about it, the first thing that came to mind is that at Talcott First, we just finished a sermon series. Actually, this week we'll finish it up. Chen is going to be finishing up the sermon series with using the book, The Art of Neighboring, by Jay Pathak and Dave Runnan. It's a good book. Like, I would encourage you, if you have an evangelism team, if you have some people that are interested in looking at and how to reach our neighbor, I would encourage people to look at this book, and your church have a healthy conversation about that. And if these guys are just having to listen to podcasts, we'd love to have you on to talk about this. So I'll throw that out there. But one of the things that we discovered in having this conversation of what it would look like to live out that great commandment, loving God and loving our neighbor as ourselves. One of the struggles that we realize is that we put up barriers to keep us out. And I think sometimes when we talk about community and we talk about, as Hebrews 10 talks about, don't stop meeting together with other believers, which some have gotten in the habit to do, is that sometimes we place barriers up in church or in just different settings because if something happened, And we allow that one experience to wreck the rest of our faith and our experience because of that one bad experience, not looking at how people are people, and we all have problems. We all fall short of grace. We all need, like, and so we just like use that as an excuse. Well, that one time I got hurt. Well, like look at our family lives. Like how often, like we're some of us are getting ready for Thanksgiving and some of us are getting ready to go do Thanksgiving things. You still get together in some way, shape, or form. And I know that there's broken relationships where that doesn't happen. But what if we expanded our view, not only of our neighbor and looking at our neighbor, loving our neighbor as ourselves, but looking at what are some ways that we can let go of the boundaries and barriers that keep us from meeting with people, and just say, hey, I'm not going to allow this to dictate, like not hurt my experience or hurt my meeting together or coming to worship. Or I love it. Like nothing gets me more excited when I hear church members say, I don't care how bad the pastor is, this is still my church and I'm going to be involved with it.
Right. And you're right. It goes beyond, God, I had a bad experience, right? We've all had a bad experience, and not to negate or belittle your bad experience, but are you going to let that one thing control you? You're going to let that one thing dictate all that you're doing? If we had one bad experience eating ice cream, would we not try ice cream again? Right? But we do that with so many other things. I had a bad experience in church. I had a bad experience with this one person. I had a bad experience here. And so we don't allow ourselves to jump back into that. And sure, we want to protect ourselves so we don't want to get hurt. But at what point does that one bad experience become an excuse and we neglect all of these other relationships that we have or that we could potentially have because we're unwilling to move past the one bad thing, right? If we actually went and didn't neglect these, we would find that we have in common with a lot of people.
Well, and I think that's like shifting focus.
Sure.
And one of the videos we showed through this, like they have some great resources on their website and stuff like this to use for sermon series and stuff. And one of the videos that we showed, I think we showed last week, the guy talked about how he knew his neighbor needed a meal, and so he just prepared. Like he basically said, "What's two more plates?" And I think what we've done in our world is look at what we don't have and try to operate out of that, versus looking at what we do have and ask ourselves, how can we connect? How can we make disciples? How can we, be people of faith with what we have? Katie McKay Simpson last week talked about looking at the scarcity and trying to get her church to move from the scarcity model to an abundance model. And our society teaches us that we are not healthy until we have everything. And so that leads to gluttony. The slippery slope of that is huge. But if we opened ourselves up to looking at what we have, Zach and I know that we're not the world's greatest podcast out there. iTunes reminds us that quite frequently because we're not in their top 10. But in our mind, we are the greatest podcast show on podcasting show things because that's who we are and that's what we do. And it's not going to stop us from continuing trying to do this thing. It's, we try to do better, and I think we're doing a lot of things moving towards a better place. But I think that whole idea of sharing encouragement with one another is huge. Right. And encouraging our friends and our family. And so if you notice someone's not attending church or someone's not being a part of your small group or whatever, what are some ways you can encourage them with what you have versus, what you don't have?
Right. Well, and I think that's where it ties back in here is let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, right? How are we lifting each other up? How are we encouraging one another? How are we pushing each other towards love and doing good rather than not loving and not doing anything, right? Or causing harm. And those conversations can go either way. Those relationships can go either way. If you don't have a healthy relationship with someone and all you do is focus on the negative and focus on the bad, that's not going to motivate you for love or good, right? But if we begin to flip that script, if we begin to turn that around, go from the scarcity to the abundance, or from the negative to the positive, it's not blindly just looking at everything positive. It's telling the truth. It's living into love and what that means and what that does, and how does that motivate us to do something better than what we were doing.
I love that. You know, it's funny. Well, of course you do. You said it.
I know.
So Jim Ozier, a couple of weeks ago at church conference that we had, our district church conference, he said on Sunday mornings, don't focus on the negative, focus on the positive.
Right.
And what would it look like in your church or your ministry setting, for whoever that is, whoever's listening? What would that look like in your ministry setting if you focus on the positive instead of the negative? Like, and what I would do in youth ministry, you probably did the same thing. For every negative comment you made, you had to make 3 positive to maybe try to get them to see the positive. And you got those shallow, well, his hair looks nice, or
right.
his farts smell like roses, or, you know, just like crazy stuff like that. And then you would wonder, like, why are they smelling each other's farts? But that's a whole
right. They're youth, and we know why.
Yeah. But like, what if we did that? Like, what if we told our churches, like, and this actually happened last week with us, it's talking about Mary and Martha. We was preaching on the Mary and Martha text, and you know, and I said, you know, complaining is kind of a bad thing for the church. There's a difference in critiquing and trying to improve, and then there's just the sense of complaining to complain. When you know that the church doesn't have, you know, if it's without resources, or if it doesn't have what you have, and you're complaining about that, you know, a good pastor is going to say, so what are you going to do about it? I mean, that's the way I operate, you know.
Right.
And some of it is just that way we can grow together and look at our resources and to strengthen ourselves with our resources. The other is to realize, like, hey, we're trying to operate with what we have available.
I've seen churches flip the script on this in their joys and concerns time. When that time becomes nothing but concerns, how do we find a way to remember our joys, right? And even the other way around, how do we find those moments that within our joy, we need to allow space for our concerns, for the things that make us sad, for the things that make our hearts heavy. It's that happy medium between both, and not letting one take over so you don't miss the other, right? Whether it's in our own lives or the people around us. And I just think that's what this is all about. It's this love motivates us, and we cannot neglect one another. We cannot neglect our time together. It's being fully present in our relationships, however they come across, physically, digitally, whatever. And how do we respond to one another to work towards this?
So as we bring this to a close today, I want to encourage you, when you go to your family's Thanksgiving thing, how can you be the encouraging presence in your family? That'd be a good challenge for some of us. I mean, I'm right there. I'll have some challenges with that, but I think it's a good challenge for all of us to open ourselves up for that and say, how can we be encouraging and encourage one another in a positive way versus like, man, it'd be really nice if you just go jump off a cliff, Uncle Steve, because we're tired of hearing about your Dallas Cowboys. Like, just go. It's
easy to get sucked into that negative spiral. And so how can you be that person, that motivational love this Thanksgiving in your family?
That's a hard challenge.
Yes.
And so with that in mind, if you need a break, we want to encourage you to go on the Bearded Theologians website and read our blogs. Maybe that will help you, not be necessarily involved in your family's conversations. You can also check out a new venture that Zach and I are kind of partnering in with a whole bunch of people, the Wesley and Mean Chronicles.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, we hadn't talked about that. But we help kind of curate some of the stuff for the Wesley Mean Chronicles, and you can find them on Facebook. We try to put something out on Monday, just something a little fun, just encouraging, that sort of thing.
Go on our website, buy some mugs for Christmas presents. They make good stuff. As you travel for the Thanksgiving and Christmas season, don't forget to download us on our
Castbox,
on our podcast partner Castbox. You can get it on all of the phone platforms, and you can subscribe to us. It will download the latest 3 episodes if you want it to. You can make it download whatever you want, but download, listen. We certainly appreciate it.
So for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
We hope you've enjoyed the conversations that we've had today on the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, and we'd encourage you to continue those conversations online at beardedtheologians.com or on our Facebook page. We also hope that you pick up a couple of coffee mugs to satisfy your coffee mug collection. Have a good day.